Welcome to Thought to Action, presented by the London Center for Policy Research, where we delve deeply into important issues, examine ideas, discuss solutions, and put our thoughts into action. I'm Lieutenant Colonel retired Tony Shaffer. I'm the president of the London Center for Policy Research, and thank you for being here today for this important topic of electromagnetic pulse, issues that relate to coronal mass ejections and protecting our power grid. I hope you enjoy the video. If you do, please like, share, and subscribe. Please follow us on all our social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. Also, we have Patreon. If you join our Patreon, you can join our Ask Us Anything event where you can ask us questions and we try to answer them in a thoughtful way. We're also on other media which allow for you to like, share, and subscribe everything we do. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce one of our board members, one of my friends and mentors, Ambassador Hank Cooper. For those of you who don't know Hank actually ran the Strategic Defense Initiative. He also runs an organization called High Frontier. So these are Hank's important, as are the resources that Hank runs relating to educating the public on the spectrum of issues that relate to space, nuclear weapons, and now today's topic, electromagnetic pulse. So Ambassador Cooper, thank you for joining us on Thought to Action.
Pleased to be with you, Tony.
So Hank, we're going to talk today about something that the American public, I think, is aware of. Ironically, I think millennials are more aware of it than people our age. And that's something called electromagnetic pulse, something that happens naturally. We discovered, especially during the Cold War, during the early days of our nuclear program, something called Starfish Prime, a high altitude burst, which actually resulted in the damage to the Hawaiian power grid. I think this was back in 1962. And obviously things like the Carrington Event of, I think it was 1859, where they actually had, a mass, essentially sunspot piece of the sun hit the planet and destroy all sorts of what rudimentary electronics we had back then. So where are we at on this regarding the power grid? Because everything is now far more sensitive. We have digitized literally everything. How do you see the issues relating to our vulnerability from electromagnetic pulse events?
Let me just say that I consider it to be an existential threat to all Americans. And most people don't know about it because when we learned about the problem in 1962, Tony, as you mentioned, it became highly classified because all of our strategic systems were vulnerable to EMP. And that includes our Minuteman, our strategic bombers, the communications with all of them that permits the president to be in charge of everything, the submarines and their launched missiles and so on. And the command and control system was especially vulnerable. What we did was to make it highly classified while we struggled to change that situation. Right. I was a lieutenant in the Air Force during those days, and we worked very hard to protect those systems, but we didn't do anything to protect the electric infrastructure of the nation upon which the civil societies depend. We bet everything on the idea that if the Soviets were ever to attack us this way, that we would retaliate and deter them, therefore, from attacking us in the first place.
Right.
So that was a conscious decision. It was embedded in something called the ABM Treaty of 1972, in which we made it the law of the land that we would provide no serious protection against ballistic missiles from the Soviet Union in those days or anywhere else. And it's only been in the last few years that we have begun to change that dynamic. We actually got out of the ABM Treaty in the early 2000s, but we did very little to protect the nation against this attack.
Right.
And what it takes is just one nuclear weapon being set off over the center of the United States to cause massive damage to our critical civil infrastructure, which includes the electric power grid upon which essentially everything else depends. It is vulnerable. There was a congressional EMP commission that was set up by the Congress in the I guess it was 2001 when it actually began to study this issue, and it was set up to make it public. It took 2 rounds to make it public by I think it was 2008 when the second set of reports came out. And regrettably, they have been largely ignored by our government as well as by the private sector that is responsible for protecting the grid.
Right.
We're just now coming to deal with this issue, and things are beginning to break. I'm hopeful that we're going to deal with it, but by no means do I see any urgency being undertaken by the federal government. And I believe that we have to work the problem, as I refer to it, from the bottom up, beginning locally and through the states, and building the interest in the problem from the bottom up with the people who are closest to protecting others and their electric systems. I'm happy to talk to you about that aspect where we've been making progress, but the federal government is paying no attention to what we're doing, and also what is going on in Texas, who are particularly sensitized now given their loss during the winter storm back in February. I guess it was just a few days they were without electricity because of weather. And you mentioned the other big weather issue, which one day will occur, like the event of 1859, the Carrington Event. If that happened today, it would shut down our grid and we would be completely vulnerable. The EMP Commission indicated that up to 90% of the American population would die because of starvation, social unrest, and the breakdown of all of the systems that we rely upon to keep the peace.
Right.
So social dysfunction.
Right.
So that's where we are.
Right. Well, that's the thing I'd like to do today, Hank, is to make this much more personal, because so much of this has been either ignored by leadership or fictionalized in popular games and sci-fi. And this is, again, something which is good and bad. I think many of the younger generation, I'd say 20 to 30, kind of understand, because this is a common theme in certain sci-fi games, this EMP event issue. And I know Mr. Forston wrote a book called 1 Second After, which I think was very clear on what would happen. But I don't think most people at the individual level understand how fundamental power is to everything we do. Everything we do now, everything that happens in our life, from turning on a car motor to doing a transaction at an ATM, it all requires power. And without that power, you literally lose the means of living day to day. And this is something I think we are obligated to do as a think tank, is to try to point out how vulnerable we are and then call for action. So I know we can't fix everything today, but I think it's good to scope this for people to clearly understand. One of the things I'd like to talk about as we kind of scope this is how many of the bulk power systems we now have today, the large lines that you see carrying power across the nation, the power companies, the FERC, the NERC, they all seem to be working this, and they keep saying, oh, we think we can sustain an event. But that's not necessarily the problem. The problem is distribution and down to the individual level. So how do we then create a coalition at the federal level to essentially give good guidance, and at the local level instruct leaders at the county level to the state level to invest themselves in protecting the interests of their own citizens? How do we start this?
Well, in my opinion, you do the reverse of what you said.
Okay.
That is, you begin at the local and state level to deal with the issue because of the complexity of the problem. And so the people who truly understand this, and you were correct to point out the distribution grid, which makes up 90% of the overall electric grid. Mm-hmm. And it's not included in any of the directives that have been put forward by
Right.
the federal government yet. So they're focusing on an important part of the problem, but it's only 10% of the infrastructure. And unless we deal with the distribution grid, we lose communications, we lose commercial, all the commercial business that depends upon electricity, we lose emergency managers, we lose communication to the state authorities, the National Guard, and others who are instrumental in dealing with emergencies, and we'd have a fundamental disaster. When I started working this problem in South Carolina, one of the first group meetings I had included the planner for the National Guard in the state of South Carolina, and I asked him what he would do if we lost the grid. And he said, well, we wouldn't do anything unless somebody told us what to do. I mean, that's the state of planning.
Right.
And I said to him, where do you live? And he said, Camden, which turns out to be about 60 miles from Columbia, our state capital, and where his day job, if he's on duty, is. And, if he can't drive a car because the car's not working, or he can't call in because the telephones aren't working, or broadband is down, or whatever, then he's going to worry about taking care of his family. He's not going to worry about dealing with anything else. And I can't blame him for that. And that's the state of affairs. And that's why I argue we have to begin addressing this problem in South Carolina at the local level. And we in South Carolina have started to do that. Most people know where Charlotte is because of the big airport there in North Carolina. The bedroom community is Rock Hill. It's the fourth largest city in South Carolina, city area. And York County is where we've studied the grid from the bottom up, if you will. We had a national expert come in, do an assessment of the same kind of thing he has done for our military systems here and abroad. And he tells me that the complications in York County make dealing with protecting the base, Anderson, I believe is the name of it, on Guam look like child's play. So, I mean, it's a very complex problem and we have to deal with it bottom up. Yet we did this assessment. We had a very good estimate of what it would cost to protect the distribution grid. And it turns out to be something on the order one time of like $100 per citizen of York County. And that's one time to protect the grid. There'd be more money that would be required on an annual basis to maintain it and once it's corrected. But that could be done within a year or so if the funds were made available to do it. And I've been trying now for 2 years to get the resources, not for me. I do my work pro bono because I'm concerned about my grandkids and great grandkids now. And but we can't get through to Washington to provide them the money to demonstrate that what we have will in fact work. And the Adjutant General of the state of South Carolina is on board with us. The National Guard's on board with us. The representative from that area is on board with us. And we're fighting that problem today. But we know how to deal with it. We learned how to do it on our military systems, and we just have to transfer that knowledge. But we have to do it, in my opinion, beginning at the bottom and working upward. Duke Energy, which is one of the largest energy companies in the nation, has been working with us for now over 5 years on this project. They're very much on board with helping us and working the issues, and they're responsible for the portion of the grid, the bulk power grid that you mentioned, that operates 3 major sources of electricity on Lake Wylie, the nuclear plant, a coal plant, and a hydroelectric plant. And so they're working to protect their portion of the grid, but we're not doing much of anything to protect the portion of the grid, 90% of the grid for York County that provides electricity to by way of co-op and a York County municipal company to their people. They're all on board with working this issue, but we need help. We need help money-wise. I'm trying to get the powers that be to provide, I would say by way of the National Guard, but any way they can get it to the people to work this problem, something on the order of $35 million to protect the grid for all of York County and to build a plan from that of how to empower the National Guard in South and North Carolina and beyond, particularly tied into a pilot study that's being done in Texas. And we can do this. We can get this done, I think, in a relatively short period of time. If they protect the grid in York County, we'll have a demonstration, a hard case demonstration that shows people that the estimates we have made are correct.
Right.
Now, $100 an individual ends up, if that turns out to be right for the distribution grid, and you multiply that 330 million Americans, you know, you're $33 billion. So it's not a trivial amount of money to protect people, but you listen today at the arguments going on of how to deal with the $2 trillion bill
Right.
that President Biden has put forward. And now I believe Republicans in the Senate have moved up to 800 billion. And it's trivial compared to the money that Washington is talking about. And we need to find a way to get that to the local people, to demonstrate it works, and then to build a plan to export that information throughout the country.
Right. So one of the things you and I have worked with is the EMP coalition on Capitol Hill, which I think continues to be something we need to emphasize, because while I agree with you completely on the acting at the local level to prove the concept and establish a path forward, especially I like the idea of working with the National Guard. Heck, Hank, I'd love to go down to the county level and try to get people to pay attention. Unfortunately, at this point, like you said, the funding is just not there. And that's something hopefully our audience can help us with, both in contributing and actually giving us their inputs on how to do this. But
in this case, Tony, the county level's on board.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm saying though, nationwide, I want to get this out to everybody. You know, I'm with you. Yeah, York is great, but once we get York done and you get the proof of concept done, we use that and show that to others to say, this is the way to do it. And I think that education program, helped by our friends in Congress, having them help us get into their states. The other thing I'll say as we start closing this up, there are some states which deal with severe weather that we should look at, of how they have set up their own resilience, which is Alaska. Alaska goes through all sorts of severe weather every year. Canada's had events where they had to do this. So I think as we start doing this, we need to look at our own states of how people have been able to establish at their own level, because even if we get everything hardened, you still may have downtime. You may still have times where you as an individual have to fend for yourself. And I think it's one of the things I'd like to talk about some other day as a follow-up are the things necessary for individuals to be prepared. Because right here in my little studio, within a few feet of me, I've got enough food for my family for about 30 days. I've got water. I've got weapons. The idea is to be prepared at the individual level as we get prepared. Because to your point, if one of these events happen, even members of the National Guard and responders are going to be focused on their own family. So I cannot emphasize enough the need to work on this now, because it's inevitable scientifically that even if somehow we're able to manage our affairs to prevent any electromagnetic pulse nuclear weapons going off or events, the sun does not pay attention to our desires. So it's inevitable, just scientifically, that there's going to be another coronal mass ejection at the level of the Carrington event. And we need to be prepared for that. So, Hank, I'd like to invite you back to continue this discussion in the very near future, as in, like, I'd like to continue to do this at least every couple of weeks so we can continue to keep the pressure on it. And I know for a fact that there are people who follow us who are interested in this. I just had a conversation on this about a week ago, where someone came to me and said, hey, is this real? Are my concerns in this area real? And it's like, yeah, they're real. And these are the kind of people who want to be educated and seek this kind of information. So thank you, Hank, for joining me on this. And thank you for leading this effort, both publicly and behind the scenes, as we move forward to creating resilience, which works for every American in the United States.
On your webpage, there'll be Newsmax articles that I'm writing about these issues, and I'll be putting up one more shortly as well that will your audience should pay attention to.
And we'll make sure we get those out via our social media, and it'll be on our website, as Ambassador Cooper mentioned. Thank you all today for joining us for Thought to Action. If you like our program, please like, share, subscribe. subscribe. Please join our Patreon community. We offer exclusive content in the Patreon, and obviously you guys can participate in our Ask Us Anything events. We are on YouTube. Please ring the bell. Make sure you get this information out to your friends so they can become aware and help us work this issue as a critical project to invest in their own security and their own safety and their family's long-term viability should something go wrong regarding a CME or an EMP. So follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and I look forward to talking to you all again very soon. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.